It's just spinning. All right. Hello and welcome to Tara's Voice. Today, my guest is Suzanne Orlando, and she is a very good friend of mine, but also a licensed clinical social worker who has been seeing clients for psychotherapy since 2005. That is a lot of psychotherapy. And she's also an anxiety strategy coach. So you may see her in social media as the anxiety alchemist. If you see that anywhere, that's probably Suzanne. She's a published author, a mom, a volunteer at a really cool wild Mustang horse rescue. And she's also full of useless 80s and 90s nostalgia, knowledge, music, movies, TVs, all that good stuff. I really appreciate her friendship. We met years ago, actually, on the social audio app Clubhouse. When Clubhouse was first coming out, it was in beta, it was invitation only, it was a wild time. It was during the pandemic. Turns out we lived very close to each other, which was kind of crazy. So we've had an opportunity to meet in real life. And when I was putting this together and I thought of who are the fun people that I love to talk to, who are interesting, real, genuine, obviously you were at the top of my list. So I'm so glad that you were here today. And we actually have some theater roots in common. We never did theater together, but both of us come from a theater background, which is also a fun connection. I think one of the things you realize with people is you have probably more in common with people than you have different. And you're a good example of that. So we're going to pull up our wheel of irrelevant questions and see where our conversation is going to go today. So let's pull that up onto the screen. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited.
Okay. Some of these have been submitted by people, some have not. So we'll see which one pops up. Oh, I was so hoping it was going to be the other one. Okay. I feel like, can I change it? So the one that popped up is best book you ever read. But the one that almost came up was the one right next to it was like your worst mom moment. So I may make that be one for you because I love the fact that Suzanne is a licensed clinical social worker, but she's also the parent of children, right? So parent of children. I don't know the oldest age if they're teenagers yet, but as a mom of a teenager, I live by the saying that my daughter has made it so difficult for me to be the parent I've always imagined I would be. And so when I hear about the stuff that you've got going on about real mom moments, I go, wow, she's a professional and she can have real mom. So we might circle back to that, but let's talk about what is the best book you've ever read?
This is, it's so funny that you said like we always land on what's meant to be in these, with this podcast, right? I am not a huge reader. So I really have to dig with this one. And, when we say best book I've ever read, this is extremely personal. And I used to be a more avid reader back in the day. And certainly what I would choose to read now is probably what I would not choose to read then. Just so I guess to not make this drawn on too long, my interests back probably pre-kids, I'll say. I was very interested in, just because I liked the concept of it and just, I guess, psychologically, I was very interested in things. I'll give an example. If you're familiar with Quentin Tarantino and his storylines on things, how they're really just really messed up. Out there, messed up. Like, what is this guy thinking? The more Quentin Tarantino, the better. So in terms of a book that this is going to be relevant, I did read the book. I think how old was I when I read this? I probably was around 19 years old when I read this book. A friend of mine shared it with me because it was something that was right up my alley at the time. An American Psycho. I don't know if you've ever read that book. So it became a movie after the book. The movie Christian Bale played the main character. And it's basically about this yuppie psychopath who is on Wall Street, who is super wealthy, super successful at what he does, but he's a complete sociopath, murders and kills people in ways that you don't even want to imagine. And I just was this was like a book where I picked it up and I just couldn't put it down. And it was very Quentin Tarantino-esque, I'll put it that way. And actually when the movie came out, I was dying to see this movie because the book was so graphic. I'm like, how, and I'm not a big horror, like bloody movie horror person.
And that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking,
all.
oh, you must love like horror movies.
No, don't like horror movies.
Oh,
But I
okay,
like these kinds of, I guess, like psychological, like these people are really messed up. The movie, I mean, Christian Bale's a phenomenal actor and he played the character very well because I guess you have to nail this character. But I guess legally, they could not show a lot of the detailed explanation in this book, probably for so many reasons. Probably the ratings, maybe they wouldn't be able to, get the movie to be able to be produced. I don't know.
The public.
But because they could, those details, those very graphic, disturbing details in the book were so significant, I think, to the storyline that the movie there was something huge left out of the movie. If you didn't read the book and you saw the movie, you were probably walking away extremely disturbed. But the book had so many more of those details. This is not where we were expecting this conversation to go.
No,
right?
so this is interesting though, because I do feel a lot of times when people read a book and then they watch the movie, they're almost always disappointed.
Yeah.
Like the movie is never as good as the book, which I think
For
says a
sure.
lot about us, right? Like our imagination and our ability to create in our mind characters and stories and images is so much greater than what could ever be on film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yet when somebody sees the film, they think, oh, that was so great. I have
Right.
not seen either. I do not like psychological thrillers. I
You
don't
won't
like
like
horror.
it.
I don't like anything that's scary. So I definitely would be a no-go on this. I'd have
Right.
nightmares for months. I remember when
Yes.
I was in, gosh, I don't remember how old I was. I must have been in maybe middle school. And I had a sleepover at a friend's house and we watched the movie Chucky. Do you remember that? With
Oh,
no,
yes,
that was
yes,
Chucky.
yes.
It was Child's Play. It was Child's Play. It was the redheaded
Chucky was the doll.
doll.
Yep.
I literally, and I was a child who just never really was exposed to horror movies, graphics, things like that. So I was probably a little bit more sensitive than another kid. And we watched this movie at this sleepover. All bad things happen at sleepovers, right?
They do. I agree.
I literally remember as a kid not being able to close the shower curtain in the shower to take a shower for months after that. I was so traumatized. And that was really my one and only horror movie that I have ever seen and never watched one afterwards. I was just completely, and I don't know why I thought some doll was going to come out and kill me in the shower at my parents' house, but I literally could not close the shower curtain.
Yeah.
And so that was it. That turned me off. I was never going to watch another horror movie. And I don't think I've ever seen one really since.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinating and I don't know. So maybe you can explain this to me. What's the difference between what you would consider a psychological thriller and a horror movie? Because to me, I would put those in the same category.
I think there's definitely crossover. There's definitely blurry lines there. I think a psychological thriller, I would say it more like, there might not be super graphic things on the screen to some extent, but I think it more gets into your head and you continue to think about it afterwards. I think horror.
So it's more disturbing.
I think it's more disturbing. I think there's more like reflection and thoughts about it versus a horror movie. Yes, of course you take it with you. I'm with you. Like I would have probably done the same thing and had that same response and reaction or I think dolls are creepy anyway, but just like having any kind of a doll or anything, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this thing is going to kill me in my sleep. I would have a really hard time unpacking that or forgetting about it after seeing a movie like that, especially at that age, probably even now. But I think horror movies are they're more direct and in your face. And I mean, there's jump scares and things like that come out of horror movies, but I think it's more like, it's right there in front of you. Like you know what to expect because it's played out for you on the screen versus a psychological thriller. I just think it just gets in your head and you just continue to think about it.
So I'm curious why American Psycho though is the book that like had the biggest influence on you.
And I don't know. I don't know if influence is the right word. I think just looking back and just answering the question, it's one of the books that I've read in my life that just sticks out. Like I just remember the details of it. And I just remember reading it and being so into it. And I was not somebody who picked up a lot of books. that weren't required for school. Even that was hard for me to get through a lot when we had to be assigned like novels in English class. I just think that one really, I don't know what it was about. It just really, I was interested in it and I
So
couldn't
this
put it
is
down.
really interesting to me on so many levels. And this is one of the reasons I really love talking to you, because my daughter is not a reader. I was
Okay.
an avid reader. I was the kid who would get in trouble at night because my mom would be like, turn out the light and go to bed. And I would be
Uh-huh.
reading and reading and reading. So I've always had the, saying, readers are leaders. Like, you
Yes.
need to read. And my daughter is not a reader. And she has said it's probably my fault because when she was little, I was just in survival mode between my
Yeah, of
divorce and
course.
her cancer. I was in survival mode. I was not a parent who every night would read her to go to sleep at night, where when I was growing up, my mom read to me every night.
Mm-hmm.
That probably
Mm-hmm.
developed my love of reading. And she's like, we were in the hospital. Like, I wasn't really reading her to bed,
Yeah.
like tucking her in and taking a bath. Right. And she does not like to read. So she's very much like you. And it's it's funny because I hate to say this out loud and certainly publicly, like the judgment that we have. I like to think of myself as a non-judgmental person. I am a very
Mm-hmm.
judgmental person. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
true for most of us.
I
We
think
like
so
to
too.
think of
Yep.
ourselves as a non-judgmental
We're
person.
always judging.
So when she's like, I don't like to read, I'm like, well, clearly you're not going to be successful in life because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't like to read, readers are leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I meet someone like you who I consider so successful, and not just in your career. I know you have a very successful career, but when I say successful, to me, you're somebody who's successful in life
Mm-hmm.
because you're so authentic in who you are, comfortable in your own skin. You've overcome quite a lot. You're very transparent. You're genuine. You're somebody who does life well. Right. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't seem to, or at least it seems to me, you don't seem to look
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of validation from outside people. You feel
Mm-hmm.
very comfortable. And this is just who I am and how I show up. And to me, that's
Mm-hmm.
always the sign of someone who's very successful. So I look at you and I go, maybe there's hope for my non-reader daughter.
There is,
You
right?
know, maybe she'll be okay if she doesn't want to read.
Yes, I think so. And I know so many people who are obsessed with reading now and could care less about it when they were your daughter's age, right? So I think there's a lot to be said with that. And I also truly believe that even with kids, even with teenagers, right? If they find something that they're interested in whatever capacity they do it, and usually like with most things in life, it's not when we're going searching for it. Sometimes it just pops up. There could be something that piques her interest. I think once she grasps something, even if it's just one book in her life, I think that'll get her into it. That'll get
Well, it's
her.
interesting. We're talking about college, right? And so
Uh-huh.
she has thought she wanted to do psychology. That's technically what she's currently enrolled in, but she hasn't started yet. And she's already talked about changing her major like most kids do, right?
Yep.
And she's brought up law school a few times
Okay.
because she took a law class in high school and really liked it. But my daughter was the kid who I was surprised they let her graduate. Like she had the worst case of senioritis that I've ever seen on a human. She was like, I'm just counting my days to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't necessarily really want to go to college, even though she's going to
Mm-hmm.
college. And then
Mm-hmm.
she brings up law school every now and then and how she doesn't like to read. And I look at her and I'm like, do you realize the amount of reading that's involved in law school? Do you
Mm-hmm.
realize the amount of school that's involved? So it'll be very
Mm-hmm.
fascinating to watch this journey unfold over the next few years
Yeah,
and see where
absolutely.
life leads her. And it's curious to me that this is a book that's so stayed into your brain. And yet and I would assume when you read it, did you know you were going to become a licensed clinical social worker?
No, that was at the stage in my life where I was like, what am I going to do? I'm not smart. And you're talking about your daughter going to college, but isn't really kind of floated through her senior year, had senioritis, is like, okay, I'm going to go to college, but like, do I really want to go to college? Like, it's a very familiar story to me because that was very similar to in
This
ways.
is a horrifying story to me. This is my horror movie. I am living my horror movie with my daughter.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying about her and where she's at in life right now is very familiar to me because there's pieces of it that sound like where I was at her age
This
too.
gives me so much hope.
I
This
was
is why
not.
I like talking to you.
Yeah, I was really, and it was different back when we were back in the early 90s, right? It was, and I think it's still relevant now to some extent. I think there's more, I think people are more open to other possibilities this, after high school now than they were then. Because back then, especially growing up in Bergen County, it was you go to high school, you go to college, you get the career for your entire life, and then you retire at 60, and then you live your life then, right? That was pretty much what was, at least where I grew up, that was ingrained into my head. And I was a terrible student. I hated school. I just got by. I didn't apply myself. I didn't want to do that. And it wasn't until when, at the time I read this book, right? I think I was like 19 years old. It was, I think at that point, oh my God, I think I was in my third college at that point. Yeah. So, and I was going to school for fashion, and I couldn't draw. I was not in a place where I was now. I was in my own therapy. I really loved my therapist. I was in that place, and I really I was in the back of my mind, I'm like, I would love to be a therapist, but I'm not smart enough. I don't apply myself in school. I don't have the grades. I can't ever do this. And I was in that place. So at the time when I was reading this book, I wasn't like, I'm going to be a therapist, but I understood, I guess through my own journey, I understood the process of therapy. And I was just so fascinated by people who had this extreme, like, sociopathic tendency, just in an entertainment value, not in real life. Well, maybe it was, depending
but really
on who you
in
dated,
real life, right?
Right, because sometimes,
you do therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
to me, this is a real correlation. I was part of a group one time actually on Clubhouse, and we were having a conversation about your favorite movie and how your favorite movie is a deep reflection of who you are and how you view the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you transfer this into a book, here's this book that you have as somebody who doesn't love to read, and it makes this deep impact on you. But the book is really about the human psyche. And then you go on and pursue an entire career of the human psyche.
Yeah.
So to me, this is makes
Mm-hmm.
point A to point B really clear.
Absolutely.
Right?
And in the beginning of I'd say it was a foot in the door in the field that I'm in, not necessarily my career. When I had graduated with my undergrad in psychology, finally, I worked at a residential facility with chronically mentally ill adults who were who had schizophrenia, who had acute bipolar disorder, who were, to some extent sociopaths. Like I did work with those. These are people who back in the 80s, 70s, 60s would have been hospitalized their entire life before the whole reform of that part of the mental health world, when people now are just in long-term residential placements. So that's interesting, because around probably about 2 years after the time I was introduced to this book is when that kind of transformed.
Wow. You wonder if that planted those seeds of this is what
Maybe.
I find interesting.
I'm
surprised you've never thought about that.
I never have. No.
Oh, yeah. I would think that was the seed planting of people are a little crazy, and I know that's not the technical term to use, but I always think about with dealing with people and the public and business and stuff like that. Right. Cause I think maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. It's 4% of the population deals with some kind of what would be considered like a mental health problem. Or
I don't know the current statistics, but I would think that it's probably higher than that.
That's what I was saying as I was going to say that, because initially I remember I was reading that it was 4%, and I'm thinking post-pandemic, I bet it's a lot higher.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure.
But I would train the women that I work with. If you have 100 customers, that means that, at least 4 are mentally challenged. Right.
Yep.
And I would venture as a woman, depending on the day of the month, we would probably all fall into that category.
Exactly.
So you just never know what people are dealing with. Right.
Right. That's right.
And how many people have high functioning anxiety, and people have all different sorts of things. I dated somebody who was bipolar and didn't know they were bipolar. And I mean, this was somebody who ended up being in my second very abusive relationship, second restraining order. I started going, okay, I can't date after this. I'm collecting restraining orders the way that, Elizabeth Taylor collected husbands. It was very traumatic, because you think, oh, I went through this. I learned how to watch all the warning signs, and, kind of fell back into that. But had no idea. And it wasn't until after we separated and found out some history and all of that, and found out they were bipolar, and was like, oh, now this makes a lot of sense.
Right.
A lot of this behavior makes sense. But I had dated somebody who literally was this is crazy. So we meet online, tells me he's never had children. I was at a
Okay.
point where I was like, I really don't think I want to have any more children. I was in my late 30s, early 40s, was
Hmm.
dating, was like, I really don't think I want to have any more children, but he had never had children. And so we had multiple conversations about maybe I would have one more child since he had never had children. He traveled a lot for work. Um, and I just thought, okay, this is the greatest guy. And turned out he was married with two children who lived
Oh
on
my
the other side of the
goodness.
country. Yeah, I had no
Wow.
idea.
Wow.
And I went through this moment of, do I reach out to this woman and tell her your husband
Yeah.
found me online, told me he was single, and it was and this is where the reason I didn't do it, because I thought this person is a little nuts. Because it's
And
one
you
thing
don't
to
know what they're
say I'm
capable of.
divorced.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say, I'm divorced, I have children, I really want another, but to make up an entire life where your children don't exist, not just your
Yeah.
wife doesn't exist, but you've never had children. I thought this person has to be a little nutsy. And after having already left nutsy
Hmm.
relationships and
Hmm.
realizing with restraining orders and how dangerous that can be, I thought, my daughter's safety trumps her marriage issues, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
But
yours, of course.
yeah, yeah, but you think again, like, people are so weird. So I
Yeah.
can't imagine working in your line of work, because I think people are a little, crazy in just what I've experienced in life. Now, I don't know. I'm known for saying the saying, you attract who you are and not what you want. So I'm not sure what that says about me.
Right. Or that
These
you
crazies.
it repeats until you do things differently, right? Or until you are ready to move through that or move on to the next part of your journey, right? You just, or you haven't, I guess, haven't learned the lesson yet, whatever that means, you know.
So I think it's an energy thing, and this is interesting.
Hmm.
When I started dating the person I'm with now, who is probably one of the healthiest relationships I've ever had in my life,
Right.
if probably one of two healthy relationships that I've had in my whole life. And we were dating a few months, and the sister-in-law and I were talking, Caroline,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I said, I don't know, I'm not really into him. Did I ever tell you this?
No.
No, oh, yeah, I said, "I don't know, I'm not really into him." And she was like, "Why?" Because she had just seen me go through the breakup with the
Right. Right.
bipolar dude. And she said to me, she's like, "Tara, we were all like, what is going on? Like, why is she dating this guy?"
Uh-huh.
Right? And so now I'm with this new guy and they all like him. I always joke, he's my brother. Like, I'm dating my brothers. My
Oh.
brothers are twins. He is their triplet.
Oh, that's so
And I
funny.
was it's so weird. And I'm like, I don't know. I said, I'm not sure that I'm really that into him. And she's like, "I don't understand. Like, you've gone through a string of
Hmm.
really not great people. What is it about him that you don't like?" And I said, "Well, he's kind of like gray sweatpants." I said,
Okay.
nobody really wants to go out with gray sweatpants. You want hot leather pants. You want sexy leather pants. You want fun clubbing leather pants." I said, "But like when you come home, you don't want leather pants. You just want to put on a pair of boring gray sweatpants."
Yeah.
And he's kind of like gray sweatpants.
Okay.
And she said to me, very, very insightful. She said, "Tara, do you think you don't deserve to be happy?"
Very
And
insightful,
I was like, "What?"
Caroline.
And she said, "I think you," and my sister-in-law met my brother when they were 14. They're now going to be 40. And she said, "I think you're deeply confusing lust for love."
Mm, very bright.
And I really had to step back and think about that, because the energy of these other relationships was very volatile. But
Mm-hmm.
having grown up in a home that was very volatile,
Mm-hmm.
that was very comfortable for me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was
right?
almost like gray sweatpants for you.
Yeah. And so the volatileness was what felt, if there wasn't a little bit of going on, it felt like, oh, this person doesn't love me, or there's just nothing
Mm-hmm.
there. Like, there
Mm-hmm.
needed to be a little bit of drama for it to feel
Mm-hmm.
normal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very challenging over the last number of years to not equate healthy with boring monotony,
Gotcha. Yeah.
right?
It's so
And so
true.
every time I start to think that, I go, okay, Tara, this is not boring monotony. This is healthy. He is a very healthy person.
Yep. Yep.
You are not normal. You are not used
Absolutely.
to healthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting with the boring monotony and connecting it to a relationship. I'm not anybody who, I'm not a huge workout guru at all. Like I exercise here and there, but I saw somebody who I know who is a personal trainer. One of the things that they say is, in order to build muscle, in order to, whatever your fitness goals are, the workouts have to be, to hear me for what I'm saying, have to be boring. You have to exercise consistently with the same exercises. You have to target the same muscle groups in the same way and be consistent with it in order for them to grow and build and to be healthy and to transform yourself into the place that you want to be. And it's reminding me of what you just said a little bit, right? I have to, the monotony of, which isn't a bad thing, the consistency, the healthy, it's a new path for you. You are so, you were raised not in that place.
Yeah.
And the non-chaotic connection and relationship is that's the transformation right there.
And it feels different, right? And I think for a lot of us, whether it was from your family or maybe you had a relationship, like I talked to a lot of women who at one point in their life had a very abusive relationship or unhealthy relationship. Yeah. And it rewires your brain. And you know that probably way more about this than I do. But I was learning about how it's, I guess, called trauma bonding, and really how your brain rewires in a way that it feels normal.
Yes.
And then we wonder why all of these women are in abusive relationships. And we're like, well, a lot of us rewired our brains to be in these unhealthy patterns, you know?
Yep.
And both ways too. You could have a totally healthy guy who meets a girl who's a little bit nutso, and he's like, why am I getting, caught up into this pattern? But then I go, okay, well, if we go back to our stats, right? Majority of the country, we're just all a little messed up.
We are. How can we not be? We are 100%. I remember when I met my husband, my very good friend, Michael, he was like one of my best friends at the time, had watched me go through like all of these really asshole relationships with these guys. And I remember it was probably the first night he met Chris. He pulled me to the side and he looks at me and he goes, okay, what's the catch? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, like, I can't. And he didn't really have to dig with my history of guys, but he would always try to be like, okay, where's the asshole component in this one? Most of the time it was quite obvious to him, but he couldn't find anything. He couldn't find one red flag in Chris at all.
Wow.
And that's kind of how I knew. I mean, I knew it, right? But that's kind of how I was like, oh, I got Michael's
confirmation.
Yeah, because he's never going to tell me. He's never going to be okay with that unless he knows that they're a genuine person. So that was
well, you're very lucky to have a Michael in your life. I think more of us need those Michaels. I went through a season after my divorce, having been married to somebody who had, massive personality disorders and stuff like that, that as soon as I would start dating somebody, I would introduce them to all my friends because I no longer trusted my own judgment. And I thought I need other people around me to determine if this is an even person I should continue to date. So most people say, don't introduce somebody right away to your friends. I was like, third date, you're going to meet all my friends.
You got to pass. I don't want to waste my time. You got to pass the test. And
like, what am I not seeing here?
But I think it's the lens that we see things through too, right? Your lens was completely different. And I think this is with all relationships and even with our kids, right? The lens in which you view things in a relationship is so different than how others will see it, for better or for worse. But a lot of times when we are in those situations where on an outside perspective, it's so clear and obvious that you're going into like uncharted, dangerous waters, you are so close to it that you can't even see it. And it can be a struggle sometimes when you have people saying to you, this isn't a good idea, when you're in it and you're like, I see everything fine. Like, it's okay. Thankfully, you had gone through so much of your own circumstances with relationships that you were now looking to your friends to have that clearer lens and vision than you were able to have when you were completely in it in the front row.
And I think there's this fine line, at least for me, where I've struggled with, in that when you go through bad things in your life, whether it's a relationship, a job, a circumstance, you learn from it, right? You
Mm-hmm.
learn from your mistakes. You learn from what I didn't recognize or what I should have done differently or could have done differently or what did I ignore? For sure, if I go back and I look at the person I married to, I mean, there were plenty of red flags. And I've had to do a
Sure.
lot of work to say, why did I choose to ignore them? What was going on with me that I allowed myself to get into a relationship with? For those of you who don't know, my first husband was, I ended up in a domestic violence divorce and stalking and
Mm-hmm.
found out that he had made up a whole life that didn't exist. I mean, it was very, not just traumatic from the domestic violence, but finding out my whole life had been a lie. I mean, very Lifetime movie, like everything I
Yeah.
thought I knew was not real. It was like becoming unbrainwashed. And, you want to take that and say, okay, I've learned from that and I'm not going to repeat those mistakes. And at the same time, not let somebody else's baggage affect a new person. Like I had
Yes.
massive distrust issues. I was married to somebody for 7 years and found out that he had a whole life that didn't exist. So imagine meeting anybody else from there. I mean, the first thing I did was
Forget it.
background check them
Of
and, are
course.
you a liar? And looking every little thing to find out, okay, where are they lying? What are they not trusting? And I still, and this is, 15, 16 years later, I still find moments, even in my current relationship, where I'll be like, are they lying to me?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
having to walk that fine line of, I learned from that and I realized the things I ignored and didn't trust my gut and overlooked. And at the same point, it's not a new person's fault or responsibility to
That's
take
right.
on your old relationships issues, right?
That's right.
That's not fair to that
Right.
person.
Right.
And
And
that's a
that's huge
tough
growth.
line, I think.
It is. That is tough. And that constant reminder of this person is not that person,
Yes.
and giving them the opportunity to show, not necessarily to be in the relationship with you, and for you to understand that that's not every relationship is going to turn out that way. But there's a lot of work that gets done with working through that. And as you're saying, even years and years and years later, there still are moments where that thought pops up in your head, which makes sense.
Well, and I think what's so good with you and your friendship is that, particularly within parenting, you just feel like, oh my gosh, I know I know the parent I want to be. I know the
Mm-hmm.
things I want to say. Why can't my child respond in the way that I would like her to respond?
Yep.
Why is she not being the child that I should have based on my genetics? Like my daughter
Mm-hmm.
is 180 degrees different than me. I mean, if you took me and spun me upside down, I don't know. I honestly, there's moments where I'm like, she cannot genetically be related to me. I mean, that is how different we are, right?
Yeah,
And so I constantly remind myself, God gives you the child that you need, not the
that's
child
right.
that you want. And when she gets all angry at me, I go, take it up with God. He chose me to be your mom for whatever reason we're still trying to figure out, right? um, but it's this, then I see someone like you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're so real and transparent about not being the perfect mom
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and not always handling things in the way that you would wish to handle them,
Yep.
or if you could go back and do them. And I think, wow, this is somebody who has years of education, years of skill, years of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that I don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And if even you can be a human mom, that gives me permission to be a human mom, because
Yes.
I've always said, right, like as parents we're basically helping keep future Suzannes in business, right? Like when you go to therapy, what do you always talk about? It was your mom's fault,
Yeah.
right? Like it all
Yeah.
starts with the mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think all the time, my gosh, I'm going to keep so many therapists in business just by how much I screwed up with my daughter. Right?
But I think that and there's we're laughing about it. I think there's truth in that, right? We're human at the core, and I think one of the best things we can do for our kids is screw up. And I'll finish my thought with that, is because when we screw up as parents, which we're going to do a lot, being able to be transparent with our kids at an age appropriate level and say, hey, I screwed up. Hey, I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. My emotions were not in control in that moment. And this is what I should have done differently. You're modeling the behavior for your kids, that it's okay to mess up. And you're owning responsibility for your choices, which is then giving them an opportunity when they screw up. Oh yeah, mom, I remember when mom said this to me. It's okay for me to say this to mom. Mom's not going to judge me for that. I know it's not going to be that clear, right? There's going to be a lot of gray areas with that, but modeling that behavior for our kids is such a huge superpower for us as parents, because the more we own and take responsibility for our own shit, raising our voice when we know that we shouldn't have, saying things that maybe we look back and we're like, oh my God, my kid's going to be in the therapy office because I just talked to them that way and I called them that name, or I said that, or I told them I was going to take that away, or whatever it is, you can go back and talk to your kid about how that wasn't the best choice that you made, and own that. Take responsibility for that. It's not showing a sign of weakness. It's anything but. It's showing a strength and giving your child a strength then to learn how to own responsibility for the choices that they make that aren't so great.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I've struggled with as an adult is I was raised in a family with parents who they were never wrong.
Yes.
Even now, right? They were never wrong. And that has built up just a lot of resentment that I've had to work through of, that acknowledgement. So when, Emily was little, I really did try to model that. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I did this. I do not think that she yet appreciates that. So I appreciate you saying that, because I'm waiting for the day where she's going to be like, I really appreciated that my mom admitted she was wrong all of the time.
Yeah.
Because she has yet to appreciate that.
Well, I'm going to say this to you about that, right? On the surface, she doesn't show the awareness or appreciation for that. I am going to say, based on my professional history and working with a lot of teenagers and adolescents, particularly girls, that there is a seed back there that is growing. And I'm imagining there is a conscious awareness of what you just said, that you are owning your responsibility, but her saying it, she's not going to say it, because there's a whole layer of things that if I say it, then I admit it, and I'm giving mom, I'm giving mom a pass, and I'm letting her off the hook, and I have to
I'd like
angry at her, and I have to. It's like, I'll give you an example, and oh my gosh, when my daughter said this to me the other day, I was like, holy full circle moment, because so I've worked, I've been doing this work since the early 2000s, and a lot of times when I'll you know what? I'm just going to tell you what my daughter said to me, and then I'll go into it. So my daughter, in preparing for her theater audition that she was doing, it was Sunday, and the two of us were home. My husband and my son were out playing golf, and I looked at her. She was like sitting on the couch, and I'm like, so you might want to go and practice. And she looked at me and she's like, well, now I'm not going to go practice because I was, but now it's your idea and I'm not going to do it because you told me to. And I was like, I like almost laughed to myself, because if I tell you, if I had like $1 for every conversation I've had with an adolescent over the course of my career, when they have said to me, and I'm going to use homework as an example, my mom gets pissed at me for not doing my homework, but every time I'm about to do my homework, my mom says, did you do your homework? And I close the books. I'm like, I'm not doing it now, because now it's your idea, not mine. And I'm like, but this is what happens in their brains. They could have, my daughter could have been like, yep, I'm going to practice. And because I reminded her of it, she can't practice now because I'm going to think it was my idea and she's doing what I told her to do. So this is how the adolescent brain works.
This is so fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I try to remind myself, and I've said this to my daughter, and probably this is what she'll talk to her therapist about. She'll say things, and I'm like, I understand that, Emily, but you don't have a frontal lobe. And so I'm talking to you, understanding that you are missing part of your brain. And so I have to talk to you knowing that you don't have a full brain yet, kind of like when you talk to the dog and the dog doesn't have the same brain. She's like, rah. So I'm like, I'm just going to be patient, right? And then she's like, rah, rah, rah. But I also remember being 18 and really, I didn't know everything. I mean, you knew everything at 18, right? I knew much better than all of my parents at 18.
Yes.
And I look now and I go, I got married at 23 years old to a legit like psychopath, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one should have legally let me get married. I still not have a full brain.
Yeah. Right.
These are why we do these.
The lobe is not fully developed. Right.
Yeah. And it's tough. She's a very feisty, very strong-willed child. And I mean, we really butt heads. People used to say that with teenagers. They say, oh, they turn teenagers to teenagers. And I was like, oh, I'm so lucky. I don't have that. I don't have that. It was when she got her license. When she got her
Now,
license.
oh,
And we
freedom.
also moved. So we had some personal
Yes,
things going on. And that's when
of
everything
course.
changed. And but I also remind myself when I get so frustrated, I go, the reason that child literally survived stage 4 high risk cancer is because she is so stubborn and she
Yes.
is so argumentative that tumor was like, hey, I can't take this one anymore. Hightail it out of here. Like
That's right.
she, so maybe if she wasn't so strong-willed, combative, argumentative, I'm going to stand my ground, I'm not giving an inch, maybe she wouldn't have survived,
Right. Right.
So I try to be grateful for the moments where I'm like, crying in tears
Of
because things
course.
aren't, why are we fighting?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm hoping she'll grow up to be that kid who's like, yeah, I gave my mom such a hard time, but now I see she's my best friend. I don't know if
Mhm.
that will happen, but that is what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, of course.
We'll see.
And she has that bit of her personality that she's always had, that strength within her. But look at you, and you were alongside her the entire time, providing that foundation and stability for her when she was battling her biggest battle in life. So you set that tone as well.
Yeah. She should appreciate that more.
She will, but I'm telling you,
That's right. You should tell her that.
at the stage where she is now, she will she will not ever admit to that. But I think
Well, we've
that's where,
also
yeah, go ahead.
we've had interesting conversations where we've had to really kind of acknowledge that yes, we both went through her child cancer together, but I had a completely different experience than she
Of
had,
course. Of
being the
course.
parent versus the patient,
Of course.
and really allowing her to own that her experience was not mine,
Right.
and
Right.
her everything about it was different than how I remember it,
Yeah.
how I processed it, my
Yep.
experience. And as she's become an adult, for her to really be able to talk about that differently.
Yeah.
And it's been very interesting the things that she does remember and how much she doesn't. And
Gotcha.
also kind of understanding that, like, obviously, I remember everything. She really doesn't. I mean, she was 3.5, 4 years
Yeah,
old.
of
There are
course.
bits and pieces she remembers, but so some of the ones I'm like, you really remember that was so insignificant. And then the things that were so significant to me that are forever ingrained in my brain that I will never, forget. She's like, I don't remember that happening, you know?
Right.
Um, and maybe that's how it is in childhood, right? Like I remember
Yeah.
things growing up that if I said now, my mother would say, I don't remember that happening. Where for me, it's like, Mom, I spent 5 years in trauma therapy trying to get over that. You don't
Yeah.
remember that,
Right.
right?
It's perspective, and that's
Yeah.
the personality part of it. It's kind of like when you're I don't know, like you're playing with your young children and you're like, "Oh, I just want to lay on the couch and I'm playing." But you're unlocking a core memory for them. And when they go back, when they think back to their childhood, they're going to think of the stupid game of, I don't know, like catch the toy. I don't know, like that you were playing with them in the living room on that hot day, and they're going to remember every detail of it in a way that you're not going to. So you never
Yeah.
know, right? What you are providing for them. It's all perspective.
Yeah, it was cute. I was walking the other day with saw this mom and this little girl, and the little girl was all like, Mommy, mommy, mommy. And I almost started crying. I literally almost started crying in public. I was like, oh, your daughter still wants to be with you and she still thinks you're her
Oh,
best friend. And I'm so jealous. And the mom was like, I'm so tired. I'm just so
yeah,
tired. She was
yeah.
also a single mom, it turns out. And
Okay.
I said to her, I know, I remember being really tired, but I would give anything for those
Yeah.
moments now. Right.
Oh, Tara.
So
And
much
in
for
the moment,
laughing.
yeah, but
Yeah.
in the moment, you don't. That's different. Like in the moment, that mom, and at moments you were too, like was exhausted probably and wanted nothing
Yeah.
more than to just like be at home and just go watch a show and let me just do my thing, right?
You're just
But your
tired.
perspective
Yep.
was different. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that perspective, I think that's the one thing for those of us who have older kids, and
Mm-hmm.
we could talk about the lack of community and the lack of relationships. But I think one of the things that younger moms need to be around older moms who have older kids to remind them that, yes, it is really, really hard right now, but it is going to go so, so fast. And that
Yes.
however they're feeling, of like, oh my God, my kids are like driving me crazy, and you feel so guilty, but that is so normal,
Yes, it is.
right?
We all did. We
Like
all
we have this
experienced that.
society that you're not supposed to feel that way. And particularly now
No.
with, social media, you're
Oh,
definitely
forget
not
it.
supposed to feel
Oh,
that way because, everybody's kid is an honor roll student, like according to
right.
my social media feed, right? And they've all won an
Yeah,
award, got a scholarship, and just won some sports competition. I mean, it's
I can't.
crazy.
I can't.
So,
I
and I
know.
think this is a good segue, Suzanne, because I think a lot of that causes us to have anxiety and
Yes.
stress. And I know we've talked a lot about this, that in the last few years, just the anxiety of everybody, people who maybe never had anxiety before are feeling anxiety,
Hmm. Hmm.
whether that's because of the rise of social media, whether that's
Hmm.
because of the high levels of division, like with what's going on politically in our country, and
Hmm.
even just going through the pandemic. I was just talking to somebody on another episode about this, how we went through a season where we were on this heightened fight or flight,
Yeah.
like real fight or flight. And then it was over and it was like, okay, just go back to real life.
Right.
And it's like, how do I go back to real life? And it reminds me a little bit of after Emily had cancer. I remember a lot of the social workers saying to me, one of the hardest things the parents deal with is that there's this idea when you're going through something like that of, I just want this to get over so I can go back to real life, so I can
Right.
go back to my life. And when you've gone through something where your child has almost died, you can never go back to being the person that
Right.
you were at the time.
Right.
There's
Right.
nothing to go back to, and you have to
Right.
find that term new normal, right? And I think that's what happened to all of us in the pandemic.
Hmm.
There was no life to go back to pre-pandemic.
Right.
It was this new normal. So I know you have a gift for anybody who's listening. And
Hmm.
I would like to say it's just for a handful of people, but I really feel it's for anybody.
It's for everybody. Yeah. So I call it, it's a checklist of, I call it the 5 reasons anxiety has its claws in you. And it really is, it's a download. And what it goes through is just 5 top things that I see or have seen throughout the course of my career that people have in common when it comes to anxiety. All 5 might not apply to you, but I think there probably could be one for everybody. And it just talks to what that might feel like or look like in everyday life. High functioning anxiety, it's an example of what that looks like, and how to recognize that, and a little bit of strategy on how to move through it. I do agree. When you talk about the pandemic or you talk about your own situation with going back to the new normal, it's that person did not exist anymore. That person you wanted to go back to after going through everything with your daughter, that part of Tara is still in there, but you were not that same person. There's no way you could be. And whether it's going through something like you went through with your daughter, whether it's going through the pandemic, whether it's completely transforming your life, whether it's becoming a parent, whether it's losing a loved one, you are never going to be the person that you were prior to that event happening. And I think acceptance is a huge piece of this. I need to accept who I am right now in order to move through whatever's to come next, and almost let go of what once was.
I think that's
Kind of
very hard
cheesy.
for a lot of people.
It is. And a cheesy example of that, and I almost don't want to bring it up because I hate this topic, but it's I think it's relatable. It's when you whether it's you go through a pregnancy, whether you lose weight, whatever it is, and you gained weight and you're holding on to like the pair of pants that were your favorite pants, like in college, and you're like, I'm going to fit into those one day. And every single time you do something, your body is not the same as it was. I'm sorry, when you were that age, no matter what weight you lose or whatever you go through. And holding on to that pair of pants is just a reminder of the fact that you're never going to be that same person that you once were, right? And
Oh
I
dear
have
God, I have like 2 drawers I need to throw out after this conversation.
but it's
That's
like
so depressing.
I have to release that expectation of myself in order to make room for where I am right now.
A new version. It was interesting. I think when I let totally off topic. When I let my hair go gray,
Love that, by the way.
that was part of it actually, is I woke up at 42. I looked in the mirror and I thought, I have no idea what I look like. I've been dyeing my hair since I was 29 years old. I actually have no idea what I look like. And I wasn't committed to it at all. I was just like, I'm just going to grow it. I just want to see what I look like. It was really a curiosity. That's why I didn't dye it. I didn't transition it. I was like, no, I want to see what I look like. And it was very strange because I'll see pictures and I'll be like, who's that old lady in the picture with the gray hair? And then I'm like, oh, that's you, Tara, right? And in my mind, I don't picture myself as the old gray-haired lady. In my mind, I actually still envision myself as a brunette. Like if you asked me
Interesting.
what color my hair was, my instant response would just say, oh, I have brown hair, even though clearly I don't have brown
Ah.
hair anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something, and maybe it is about that evolution of having kind of come through all of that. And, it's one of the reasons I chose Tara's voice was to reclaim my voice and find who I was again, that I feel more authentic, not dyeing my hair. And maybe, and I've never thought about this until you said this, but maybe it's because it's embracing a different version of me that is not the brown haired, stiletto wearing, innocent Tara pre, cancer, pre
Mm-hmm.
domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
Like that person doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And there's been a grief and a loss and a grieving process of that person,
Yes. That's
and then
awesome.
kind of saying, who is this new version? And I don't think you need to have anything quite as dramatic as domestic violence and cancer, but it could even be a job loss. I mean, so
It
many
could be
people go
anything.
through
Yep.
their job. I think this is why we talk about empty nest syndrome, right? Of like,
Yep.
who's this? Because I'm in this weird dynamic of I'm now an empty nester, but Jack still has some birds in the nest, right? So he's not. So it's a strange thing. But you're kind of like, okay, what's next for me? I'm not that person
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Right.
But here's what's, I guess, cool about this is that it also then kind of feels like there's a freedom to say, okay, who do I want to be now?
Right. You can choose.
Yeah.
You get to choose. There's always a choice you can make. That's one of the biggest things that I say to my kids, to myself, to my husband, to my clients is no matter every single thing you do in your day is a choice. Every single decision you make is a choice, whether it's even to get out of bed in the morning. It's a choice, right? And I can also choose how I show up and what I look like and what I wear and what interests and what I pour into. What are the passions that I want to pour into? What are the things I don't want to do anymore that I'm just sick of? It's always a choice.
And that at any time you can reinvent yourself.
Correct.
At any time you can turn around, reinvent yourself and say, I'm going to choose to be a different version of me. And I think that's so empowering that we're not stuck. And we know neuroplasticity and all of that. We can even change how we think now. I mean,
100%.
we didn't even know we could do that 30 years ago, right?
Yep.
So you can change if you're like, oh, I'm just a negative person. Well, you can change that, right?
That's right.
You can
take steps and learn strategies to not anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want the checklist, it's in the show notes. I would encourage you to download that, particularly if you're thinking, absolutely not, I don't have any anxiety.
Do it. That's when you have to
download it the most. So I would say if you grabbed it and you were like, yep, it's for me, great. You probably have more self-awareness. For those of us who are like, oh, those suckers can download that, I don't have any anxiety. They're probably the ones who need it more than anybody else. So as we wrap up, again, you can find Suzanne, all of her contact, where you can find her. Follow her on social. I know you give a lot of really great tips on your social media on strategies and how to cope with anxiety. And I know you offer a lot of that great value in your social media. So you guys want to connect with her there. If you like today's episode, I really do hope that you'll subscribe and come back. Next time we'll have another interesting person for another pretty irrelevant conversation. If you'd love to leave us a review, that's great. If you love today, if you don't, no need to leave a review. And the whole reason we do this podcast is why? It's because life really, really is worth laughing at. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah.